Grim Yulee. I'm the Director of Communications at the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation. Along with my colleagues, Greg Scarlaccio from KEI and Nick Cheney from CSIS, I'd like to welcome you to our first Korea-Japan Study Group meeting of the year. The Korea-Japan Study Group is an ongoing collaboration between the Mansfield Foundation, KEI, and the Japan Chair at CSIS. And the intention is to provide opportunities to discuss issues that are important to Korea, Japan, and the U.S. We're very pleased this morning to have Michael Oslin of the American Enterprise Institute with us to discuss U.S.-Japan-Korea relations. This really is a case where our speaker needs little introduction. As you know, the response we had to this event was so far beyond our expectations that we had to change the venue. We're very grateful to KEI for hosting the event this morning. Such a positive response to the event speaks not only to the timeliness of the topic, but also to the expertise of our speaker. Michael Oslin is AEI's Director of Japan Studies and previously was an Associate Professor of History and Senior Research Fellow at the Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies at Yale University. He has written numerous articles and 2 books on Japan and Japan diplomacy. Among his recent articles is a piece that appeared in the Asian Wall Street Journal earlier this month on the topic that we have asked Michael to expand upon today, Korea's potential to take the lead in a triangular U.S.-Korea-Japan relationship. We'll ask Michael to speak for about 20 minutes this morning, and then he's offered to take questions. Due to another commitment, Michael will have to leave at about 10:45. We are very grateful to all of you for being here this morning. And with that, Michael, thank you.
Margot, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I am really overwhelmed by the response this morning. I think it must say more about the programming quality at Mansfield and CSIS and KEI, and see so many familiar faces here. I literally thought I'd be coming in, talk to maybe a dozen or so close friends about some of my thoughts about what's going on, and luckily ran into Nick Cheney from CSIS at BBC the other day, who said, "Oh yeah, there's 50 signed up," and I thought he was pulling my leg. So I'm really happy that I learned that beforehand. It's great to come before you. I think any time to talk about these issues, but obviously particularly now we have 2 different sets of issues going on between obviously the crisis in Korea, as well as what appears to be the first stage of a settlement or an agreement between the U.S. and Japan to resolve the Futenma issue. So I think it's a nice time to try and draw together some of the strands of what's happening in the region. And I really, this morning, just thought I'd give some of my thoughts on, not a formal presentation or speech, but some thoughts on what it means, where it might be going, and then, of course, engage with you in a discussion where I assume I'll be learning more than really answering your questions. If I can, in the short time I have, let me maybe divide it up into just 3 sort of baskets of issues to talk about or think about. The first is looking at each of the individual countries' foreign policies, where they are coming from in terms of domestic concerns, domestic issues, preferences, and the like. Then move on to looking at some of the regional shared initiatives that they have. And then finally going up to the broader or broadest level of global shared initiatives. And then circle back and stop maybe with some reflections on the nature of the U.S. alliance system as it is, and where we might be going in the future with this set of relations. So again, more not quite stream of consciousness, I hope, but some more less connected thoughts and observations. Let me start with the individual countries' foreign policies. I would argue, I believe that the post-Cold War period, which now is getting into its second generation, I mean, it's 20 years out, in Asia in particular, has not yet gelled into a fully articulated or conceptualized vision of what the Asian post-Cold War future should be. And I think that's because of the nature of the political and alliance and security arrangements that developed throughout the Cold War period that were in many ways frozen in time, as were so many of the political internal disputes in the region that only began to be really discussed once that the Cold War period itself ended. Layered on top of that, of course, you had the beginnings of what I would argue is an impressive yet still very unfinished, I don't think there's any real argument about that, multilateral approach and set of initiatives, starting with ASEAN, but spreading throughout the region and picking up steam and losing steam at various times, that have attempted to first start with economic concerns, trade concerns, and the like, and then very hesitantly broaden out into more controversial spheres of activity. Now, if you look at the parallel or the analog with Europe, this is exactly what happened in Europe in, again, very different circumstances within the umbrella of the Cold War. But if you look at Western Europe, the beginnings of Franco-German reunification in the post-Cold War period, the development of the European coal and steel community, and then working its way up the ladder, I think it's not entirely irresponsible to suggest at least that something of the same pattern is beginning to play out in Asia as well. So it's within that context, then, I think that we have to look at the foreign policies of all the actors in the region, but particularly the three actors that I'm talking about now. And of course, they play at very different levels. For the United States, there remains its security guarantees, its forward-based position, its desire to play a significant, if not leading role in the region in order to shape what is very truly a broader global agenda, and obviously I'll come back to that at the end of the talk. What I think is happening, or at least I'd like to argue and hope actually to take this up over the summer in some more extended writing, what I think is happening is that for the first time since certainly World War II, maybe the 20th century itself began, is that U.S. interest and interaction with Asia is being pulled steadily into deeper engagement because of what is happening in Asia itself. So again, if you go back and you look at where the United States was in terms of its Asian engagement, it was within that Cold War context. I don't want to say Asia was an afterthought, because it wasn't, but it clearly was structured within that broader Cold War context. And if you know, not to get too geopolitical on everyone this morning, but if you look at it in a very broad sweep, you know, the U.S. eyes very, very focused on Europe, Western and Central and Eastern Europe throughout the Cold War. After the Cold War, shifting to the Middle East because of conflicts with Iraq over a decade, and then Afghanistan. And as those wind down, I think that the American global vision, so to speak, will be pulled even farther towards the East into Asia, but again, on Asia's own terms, because of the dynamism, because of the growth and the like. So I think that for the U.S., I'd certainly like to think that for the U.S., what we will see in the next decade, beginning in the next decade and then continuing on, will be a qualitatively different type of engagement with Asia than we've had. Now, I in no way mean to suggest that we haven't been engaged, that we haven't been interested, that we haven't been committed. Obviously, we've been forward committed with troops and money and all sorts of other aid for decades. But again, within a context that I don't think was necessarily responding to Asia qua Asia. That I think will change, or at least I'd certainly hope that it would change. At this stage, though, the U.S. still maintains very much the more traditional attachment, I think, to its security concerns and its security commitments. Every administration, I don't think it's unique to the Obama administration, I don't think it was unique to the Bush administration, every administration since President Nixon back in the 70s has really put understanding, developing, and I would argue praying for the U.S.-China relationship to deepen and develop and become of a significance that they hoped throughout their tenure as an administration. And that really guides, I think, the thinking of most of our administrations, and it swings back and forth between saying we're going to be hard on China and then engaging China much more. I think the Obama administration has that as much as any other administration, came in with an extremely experienced, extremely competent team that really had deep China experience, both in the Clinton administration and through venues like this, and has seen that as the pivot of much of its Asia policy. But the pivot, I think, is in order to leverage that relationship for global issues. The idea of the G2, whether or not we think it has any legs, but really to develop the U.S.-China relationship to respond to global challenges such as Sudan, such as Iran.